Welcome back. All right, news of the day video for all you fine people for your Thursday, March the 30th. And I've got some baseball on the board, but trust me, I'm not losing my mind. There's a reason why. So, tomorrow is apparently going to be the debut for Devin Levi for the Buffalo Sabres. He, of course, signed his entry-level contract very recently. The question had been asked about when he'd make his debut. Same questions are being asked with Matthew Coronato in Calgary. The difference being that with Buffalo, there's a lot riding on this. So Levi and Luukkonen is likely going to be the tandem in Buffalo next season. And the Sabres are a team that are on the right track. Now, I know there will be a lot of hemming and hawing about them missing the playoffs again this year, as there's still a small chance they make it into the playoffs, but it's not likely at this stage. So for the Sabres, I still think this is a team that's on their way up, and they've got a really good young squad, and as long as they can keep that together, I think they're in good shape. And the goaltending has let them down at points this season. It's been a talking point for, I want to say, the last 3 years, the goaltending of the Buffalo Sabres. And right now it looks like Levi and Luukkonen might be an actual, plan. Luukkonen's had his setbacks this year, but I think in a 1A, 1B situation with Levi, he could be fine, and he's still very young himself. Also, Hobey Baker Award finalists. So I'm old enough to remember a time when the Hobey Baker Award got almost zero coverage. And if a player was a Hobey Baker winner, it was kind of just a mention, because NCAA hockey decades back wasn't quite where it is now. And, I mean, it's not close. Basically, NCAA hockey is much better now in terms of player talent and all of that fun stuff than it was, I would say, 20 years ago. And again, I don't know that it's close. Your Hobey Baker finalists this year really kind of show that. So Logan Cooley, who is set to become a star player for the Arizona Coyotes, is one of the finalists. Adam Fantilli, who's had an amazing freshman year this year, he's one of the finalists as well. He's going to go top 2 in the draft. Not likely number 1, but very likely number 2. And Matthew Knies, who appears to be ready to sign a contract with Toronto fans' hope, he is a finalist as well. So it'll be interesting to see who ends up winning this award. I would not be surprised if Fantilli did win it, but again, award voting can be kind of unpredictable, but it is interesting that the 3 Hobey Baker finalists, we can all look at and say, yeah, those are all going to be legit NHLers. It wasn't always that way. It might be interesting to do a history of the Hobey Baker Award, actually. So, yeah, I might throw that up on the channel at some point in time. So the proposals with Ottawa right now are getting interesting, in that Ryan Reynolds and the Remington Group in Ottawa today, and Reynolds posting to social media, and I still think the NHL would love to have him as a partner, but the Oshawa Generals owner, Rocco Tullio, who has a bid in, has added a billionaire to his bid, Steve Apostopoulos. So I would like to thank the players who played in the 80s with names that are similar to that, so I can actually pronounce that name. But yeah, Apostopoulos has been added. A billionaire's money being added to a bid absolutely helps. And what's interesting too when you look at the bids is that you have a Toronto billionaire that I think's in on it as well. You have a bid from a Montreal, very rich guy out of Montreal as well, and they're all Canadian bids minus one from LA that's been reported. So all of this, because I keep seeing talk like, oh, whoever buys it will probably just move the team to Houston, and this is just a way to get them to Houston. I don't see why an Oshawa Generals owner adding a billionaire who's also Canadian would then want to move the team to Houston. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And there is a native group that's bidding on this as well, who actually have a claim to the land at LeBreton Flats. So that makes things interesting too, and could make it easier to get a LeBreton Flats project going. So there are some fascinating options for the Ottawa Senators in the National Hockey League at this point. And so we'll see if adding a billionaire to an Oshawa Generals owner's offer will put them over the top. So Major League Baseball, and I wanted to talk about this because we talked about Fanatics and how Fanatics, is now going to be making the jerseys for the NHL. Well, they've been doing similar with Major League Baseball for a while now. And they're adding MLB debut as a patch on the shoulders of jerseys, or on the arms of jerseys, and for the first game for a player. So you get your patch, you wear that for your first game, and then it'll go into Topps Cards packs. So they bought Topps last year, so they're getting into buying basically anything sports related. And we know that a monopoly means better production and better quality, right? Because people keep going to the video I made on Fanatics buying out and saying, well, you don't know that their quality is not going to get better with them having the pressure of NHL. Well, there's a lot of complaints from Major League Baseball fans about quality with Fanatics too. And so last I checked, Major League Baseball probably generates more money than the NHL does. But we'll see, right? So then the question becomes one of, when they start making the jerseys for hockey, are we going to see NHL debut patches on jerseys? The patch they designed for Major League Baseball, not a fan. I think it looks very generic. I wouldn't be paying $100 for a box of cards just to try to find one of those patches. And obviously, there'd just be one of each player's patch. So it's a one out of one, and it would probably be worth a lot. I'm guessing they'll be autographed as well. But yeah, really when it comes to the collectibles and the cards market, I feel like it's more of a niche market now than ever. And the people who are in that market, they will pay a lot of money for things. But people who aren't don't really see the value. Now, I obviously am, a jersey collector. I collect all kinds of NHL stuff. I've made literally thousands of magnets out of stickers and decals that I've bought from the NHL or from various sources. So I get it, but for me, cards at this point, while I have a bunch of cards, I generally just buy the cheaper ones. I buy the lower end cheaper cards, which are usually the Upper Deck MVP. The comment that I've often had when it comes to my cards collection is, well, those are just garbage. Yeah, that means that I don't have to worry about them getting damaged in some way and going, oh, there goes my collection, now it's not worth anything. I don't have that concern. So I like the cards. And when I was a kid, one of the things that got me into, becoming what I do now and all this, is that I liked collecting entire sets of O-Pee-Chee cards when I was a kid, and getting to know who every single player was on those cards, where they'd played, where they'd been, what their stats were, and I would just go through those cards time and time again and memorize stats as much as possible. So, always a nerd from day one until now. So yeah, let me know what you guys think about this idea of special patches on jerseys that then become collectibles and cards, and do you think there would be a market with the NHL with that? And does that help to expand the market then for tops, or does it just appeal then to that niche market? Because again, when it comes to card collecting, I don't know how many new people get into that or anything. We haven't seen it return to its prominence that it was in the early 90s, when there was way too much of every single product in the early 90s. Again, those ones are often labeled as just garbage. They're not worth anything. It's fine. I'm not selling them. So that's the thing. If you're not going to sell them, the value isn't necessarily that big of a deal, other than to your next of kin. Okay, so Marty Walsh has been brought in as the new head of the NHLPA, saying that he'll talk to players and gauge what they find really important. But Connor McDavid talked about how, we had the World Cup of Baseball, which seems to generate a lot of interest. I watched parts of it. I really wasn't that interested, to be completely transparent. But they want to return to the World Cup of Hockey, and I do wonder how you make that happen. But if you can have an Olympics, and you can have two Olympics where, Russian players go out and they're not technically Russia, then you could do it with a World Cup. And I really think they can make this work in 2025. That is the earliest date now that they can have it, and I hope they do, because NHL players and having a tournament, I think, is great, because we haven't had a best-on-best tournament since 2016, and I think it's overdue. And the 2016 World Cup, I had problems with it, in that the Young Stars team, which was Team North America, and then they had Team Europe that was just an amalgamation of countries, I thought that wasn't, that didn't really work. Like, can you imagine soccer's World Cup having, okay, so now we're going to have England up against Team Caribbean, and it's just all the Caribbean countries all mixed together? I can't see that working. So I think for the World Cup, you have to make it feel like it is a legitimate World Cup, and it's country versus country. And again, I understand the logistics and all the problems that would have, but I think it can work. I also think a qualifying tournament works too, and I think really for the NHL to make this work, and I don't know how you do this with the NHL and the NHLPA, I think you have to bring in the IIHF, and I think you have to have qualifying tournaments involving countries that we don't normally associate as being top countries in the world. And again, if they're going to do this in February, so during where we normally have the All-Star break, I don't know how that works either, but ideally that's where I'd like to see it, is actually feeling somewhat like a World Cup, that you'd have qualifying tournaments. All right, so last night, Paul Maurice Paul Maurice was very vocal and very coarse towards his players, and no apologies from him after the game. And you know what? He's right. I wish that the coaches were able to do this more. And it's kind of viewed as a throwback and an old school thing, but he has every reason to be frustrated. Florida should not be fighting for their playoff lives, sitting below the playoff line. Now, there's a lot of criticism that's been leveled towards his coaching as being part of the reason why Florida's in the position they're in, and that's fair. If you feel that way, that's completely fair. But it was also fair for him to come out last night and start telling his team off. He knows how important that game against Toronto is. He's watching as they fritter it away, and they had allowed 2 goals in about 30 seconds. They were just lucky it was offside. And he said post-game, he said he knew it was offside. And during the offside review, he figured it was a good time to call the guys over in a timeout situation and give them the riot act. And basically, he said the only thing he was upset about was he wished he could have been louder and swore more at his team, and that his father was really the master of this kind of thing, and that he doesn't really have the talent for it. So, yeah, and I don't blame him. I thought it was great, and I thought it worked. And that's the thing. I think it can work. The trick is you can't do it all the time because then people will tune it out. And you have to make sure that it's valid. And in this case, I thought it was valid for Maurice to really lay into them. And again, it's interesting because there will always be that coverage of, oh, this is terrible. How can he talk to the players like this? They should have had instances of that before. And yeah, I mean, it just happens. I've had many bosses over the years that eventually they'll just snap and things are said and it happens. So I respect Maurice on this, and we'll see tonight if Florida can maintain that level of play against Montreal, where if they look across the ice and they say, it's the Habs, we'll be fine, we'll win this, Montreal can beat them. Speaking of Montreal, Kirby Dach is sidelined at least a week with an upper body injury. I had to double check on that, which is too bad. Dach's had a really good year in Montreal when he's been able to play. Hopefully he can come back before the season's over and finish the season out strongly. And then next year come into camp healthy, and we see things go better for Montreal. They're not as bad of a team as their record would indicate, and I think they've done pretty well for themselves this year. And with the right moves this summer, and with a little bit of draft lottery luck, they could be in the mix next year as well. So while I talk about teams in the Atlantic, and I talk about Detroit and Buffalo and Ottawa and how much better they're getting, and how much better I think they're going to be in the future, Montreal I don't think is as far away as they may look either. Yesterday, Chytil signs a 4-year extension with the New York Rangers worth $4,437,500. Chytil's earned that. Chytil's been absolutely fantastic. And not only that, but Lafreniere's play has been really good lately too. Oh, and Capo Caco, who's on that line, pretty solid all-around 200-foot player in Caco. So what the Rangers are doing with this kid line is really interesting because I could see a scenario where, say, 3 years down the road, if you hold those 3 guys together, that could end up being the first line. There are already games. There are plenty of games where you'll watch the Rangers and say, I think the kid line was their best line. They're an energy line. They turn games around when they're going against the Rangers, and I respect their work ethic. I think there's a lot to be said for how well these guys are playing together. And I'm excited to see what happens from here. But for Chytil, if he continues to progress at the rate that he has been, I think that deal is going to end up being a steal later on. Also, yesterday, Knyzhov signs a extension with the San Jose Sharks worth $1.25 million, 2 years at that cap hit. Knyzhov, I really liked Knyzhov a lot last season. He's been injured a lot of this season. He hasn't been as good since coming back. So it's a show-me deal. I'm glad they're keeping him. I think Knyzhov has a lot of potential, and I think he could be a pretty decent defensive defenseman for them over the next couple of years. So it's a good signing. There's no risk to it at all at that cap hit of $1.25 million. So all the best to him and to the Sharks on that one. So we're looking at playoff probabilities, and this time I went by The Athletic. The playoff probabilities in the West and the East are interesting. So the number 2 wildcards, Winnipeg, they are still listed as a 53% chance to finish above the playoff line. It feels like that number keeps coming down. Calgary's at 28%, but Nashville's now up to 20%. And it feels like that's much higher than the last time I talked about it. So while there's still a small chance that Seattle would drop down into this category, odds are, with the way these teams have been playing, Seattle's pretty safe right now. But yeah, Nashville, I think, has a real chance. They have those games in hand. You have to win the games in hand. And so, yeah, I'll be curious to see if Winnipeg can hold that spot. The loss against San Jose could be a turning point for them in the positive if they get really angry about it and play like they're angry about it. But it's just the way that they just get so dejected and so down when things go wrong. That's always a warning sign, right? And then out east, you have Pittsburgh with a 67% chance. Pittsburgh should hold that spot, I would think, but they're only 1 point ahead of Florida, who now shows having a 36% chance. Buffalo has a 3% chance. Again, it's a very narrow window for them. I do not have the Islanders on the board because currently they have, I think it's almost a 94% chance. Yeah, the Islanders are going to make the playoffs. That game last night goes a long way, I think, to securing that. So yeah, it should come down to Pittsburgh and Florida for that final playoff spot. And both teams are in action tonight. I'll be interested to see if Pittsburgh loses and Florida wins, what that does to the percentage chances on the Athletic, if that changes them dramatically or not. Because when you look at the schedules that are remaining, Florida has a little bit easier schedule than Pittsburgh, but as I've said recently, strength of schedule doesn't seem to matter as much at this time of year. We see some of the top teams like New Jersey and Carolina struggling right now. And then some of the teams towards the bottom doing pretty well, comparatively speaking, with how they were the rest of the year. St. Louis and Vancouver are examples of that. Teams that have performed very well, and their fan bases seem completely happy with the fact that they're winning games that don't matter right now. So, anyways, there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.